Finding the right computer is all about knowing how much you're willing to spend and what your needs are. The good news is that just about any computer can edit photos decently. But if you're looking for a faster and more pleasurable editing experience, or perhaps you want to delve into the realm of video editing, you're going to have to pay a little more attention to the specs of the computer that you're buying. So today, that's what we're covering. Hello wonderful human beings, my name is Sheldon Evans, and in this week's video, we're going over which computer is best for your photo and video editing needs. I recently found myself in a similar position, where a power surge destroyed all my computer equipment and I had to ask myself some of these same questions. Firstly, how much do you travel? One of the biggest annoyances I've had with a desktop PC is the fact that I have to be at home sitting in front of it to use it. This means that when I'm traveling, I have to wait until I return back home before I can edit any of my photos and videos. While desktop computers are usually easily upgradable, they're difficult to move around, and the portability that you get from a laptop is just something you can't go without if you're constantly on the move. Then comes the question that has been argued for centuries: Mac or PC? I'm not going to turn this into a debate because I use both systems and I love each for their own reasons. So with that being said, I'd recommend you go with whichever system you feel most comfortable with. They both run most common editing programs like Photoshop, Lightroom, Premiere, and After Effects, but depending on the specs of the computer, the performance of these programs can differ. So let's get a little technical and talk about hardware specs. Ideally, you want to get the fastest processor, most memory, and speediest hard drives that you can afford. But there's a couple extra things you need to take into account as well, like the graphics and the display that you'll be editing on, as well as which programs you're going to be using most. Lightroom is the go-to editing application for most photographers, and it's most dependent on the power of the processor. Right now, some of the fastest processors you can find in consumer computers are Intel's Core i5 and i7 processors. Don't get anything that has Pentium or Celeron in the name, unless what you're going for is a slow computer, or you're just a fan of torturing yourself. Next up is RAM. The more the merrier. 8 GB of RAM should be enough to run Lightroom and Photoshop. However, when you start adding more and more layers in Photoshop and importing more and more images in Lightroom, things are going to start slowing down. 16 GB of RAM is what I've found to be the safe zone. You can comfortably edit photos in Photoshop with multiple layers and still run relatively complex timelines in Adobe Premiere when you're editing video. But if you can afford more RAM, it's worth the extra investment. Unfortunately, these days, Apple limits the RAM to 16 GB in their laptops. And the reason is that to put more than 16 GB of fast RAM into a notebook design at this time would require a memory system that consumes much more power and wouldn't be efficient enough for a notebook. Apple. Moving on to storage, speed is what you're looking for here. The faster your drive is, the faster your computer and your programs will boot up, and the faster you'll be able to access your files. I'd recommend getting a computer with an SSD as the main drive. SSD meaning solid state drive, which uses flash memory technology, similar to the memory in your phone and the SD cards that you'll put into your camera. These are quite a bit quicker than the regular magnetic spinning hard drives that we're used to seeing, but they're also quite a bit more expensive. A lot more expensive actually. And raw files and high resolution video files take up a bunch of space. So I'd recommend getting an SSD of at least 256 GB to install your operating system and run your programs from, as well as to use as a working drive or scratch disk. And then invest in a larger magnetic hard drive for longer term storage, whether it be internal or external. As a photographer, it's important that you pay attention to the graphics and the display that you're getting with your computer. Up until recently, Lightroom didn't make much use of the graphics card and would actually slow it down in some cases, as seen in my 3 tips to speed up Lightroom video. But they've since changed that, and applications like Photoshop and After Effects thrive on a more powerful GPU for applying advanced filters and effects. It's quite difficult recommending a video card because they get updated quite regularly, but ideally you're looking for a card with at least 2 GB of VRAM. But if you're going to be working on a high resolution display, something like a 4 or 5K monitor, you should at least be looking at a 4 GB card. Which leads us on to monitors. As a photographer, this is probably one of the most important decisions you're going to make. There's no point in having the power of 10,000 miniature horses underneath that hood if you can't see what they're producing. You shouldn't settle for anything less than an IPS display because these will give you the best viewing angles and the best color reproduction. Stay far, far away from TN and VA panels. Apple's computers come standard with IPS panels and are known to have some of the best laptop displays on the market. But the trade-off is that you'll be working on a tiny 15 or 13-inch display. So if you'd prefer a larger monitor, or if you're building a desktop PC, put your focus on the color accuracy of the monitor that you're going to be buying, more than the resolution. But don't go for anything that's less than at least Full HD. Finally is future-proofing and cost. If you don't want to have to spend a fortune buying an entire new computer the next time you have to upgrade, you should be looking at an option with more upgradability. MacBooks are favored by creatives for good reason, but they don't offer much in terms of upgradability or bang for your buck. To give you an example, I have both a high-spec 2017 15-inch MacBook Pro with gimmick bar and a custom-built desktop computer. The MacBook has a 2.9 GHz Core i7 processor, 16 GB of RAM, 512 GB SSD, and a 4 GB graphics card, and it costs $2,799. In comparison, my custom-built Windows desktop PC has a 4.5 GHz Core i7 processor, 32 GB of RAM, a 525 GB SSD, two 2 TB hard drives, and an 8 GB Nvidia graphics card, and it only cost about $1,600 to build. That means it has just about twice the power in every department at about half the cost. The MacBook also has zero room to upgrade. If you want more RAM, a bigger SSD, or faster graphics in the future, well, you're just gonna have to buy a new laptop. But with my desktop PC and with some Windows-based laptops, you can upgrade some of the components in the future. But if you do decide to go with Apple, make sure that you get the highest specs that you can afford, or you'll be kicking yourself in the future when things start slowing down a little. As I've said before, deciding on a Mac or PC comes down to preference, but it's also how much you're willing to spend for what you're getting. As a general rule of thumb, you're going to be spending more when you get a Mac while still getting less. Some people call this the Apple tax. You could argue that you're paying this premium price for an overall computing experience rather than just the hardware that's inside of it. And that's true to some extent. The build quality on Apple computers is some of the best, if not the best, in the laptop market, and has one of the best displays. It might be lacking some features and have some features that other laptops don't, but in the end it comes down to what your preference is and what fits within your budget. With all that being said, I'll link some options down in the description below for you to take a look at. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did like the video, don't forget to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet to see more videos like this in the future. I love every single one of you for supporting this channel. Thank you so much. And as always, I shall see you in the next video. Cheers!